Hi, Todd. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Lauren, glad to be with you.
I know you were just telling me you're at Sloss Tech, so hope that you're having a great time while you're there.
Absolutely. It is the third day as we're going on this conversation, and it has been great. Always great to see what innovation and entrepreneurship look like and the impact of incredible founders and incredible ecosystem builders. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of incredible ecosystem builders, I'm really happy to talk to you today. One of the places where I wanted to start is just you have such an interesting background.
Mm.
I love people that have a path that includes many different stops. And so for you, obviously, you're at Innovation Portal, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But you, I believe, have a doctorate in ministry, and then you've had some. Is that correct?
So I have a PhD in organizational leadership. I have masters in ministry.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
getting I'm
Yeah.
getting them mixed up. Yeah, so
No, all
experience
good.
history, PhD
Yeah.
in organizational leadership. You've had some time with startups. So I'm just curious, like, how do you make sense of your story as you kind of think through all of the different steps to today?
Yeah, Lauren, this is the thing I typically tell people. So one, I lovingly call myself a mutt. I am not by any means that purebred that like knew what they were going to do and pursued that one journey. I have I think at one point, and I shared it a little bit yesterday in a panel I was moderating. I said I think I've done 9 different careers basically. So I've been in higher ed, I've been a recruiter, I've been a coach as a like a actual athletics coach. I've done high ropes and facilitation. I've done startups. I've done ministry. I've done higher ed as a professor and administrator. And it's one of those things where very distinctly I realized probably about 12 or 13 years ago, it doesn't make sense out the windshield. It only makes sense
Yeah.
in the rearview mirror, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it very much is that. And so for a lot of people, they're like, "Ho- ho- how, how has that journey worked?" And what it really came down to is I recognize like at my core, I love to develop things. Okay.
Mhm.
So I love to develop people. I
Mhm.
love to develop ideas. I love to develop organizations. I love to develop athletes and individuals in their whole self. I mean, I love to develop communities. And so really what that became for me is like, how do I take the things that I'm deeply passionate about, like solving real problems, and what I'm naturally, I feel like gifted at, which is like, I believe I'm very good at helping people develop. I'm rarely the person that has the idea at the front end, which is where I tell people all the time, this is great because I now have the right seat to be able to sit there and see thousands of ideas that I don't have to come up with
Yeah.
and be able to help foster the growth of those alongside incredible founders. So
Yeah.
that's where it really comes together and it makes it fun. And I know like your background is really interesting too. And I think like how has psychology played into even your experience? Because, like, I my wife is a counseling psychologist, she's got
Mhm.
her PhD there, and I know that there's a lot that, like, as she and I talk, we find these overlaps in the startup world and other things there. So, like, I'm super intrigued even with, like, how our, different
Yeah.
backgrounds come together
Well,
there.
yeah, it's funny that you ask that because as you're talking, so many things resonate. The idea of the story making sense in the rearview mirror, I think, is something that I realized even years ago. So when I was,
Mhm.
um, I believe I was in grad school when I got that advice of, as you're writing your bio, it will make sense. Like you will be
Yeah.
able to piece it together. Um, and I think your piece about, like, really liking developing people, like, loving getting into that work and doing that across I wanna learn more about the high ropes too.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of that resonates, and I think for me, I mean, psychology is just, like, why we are who we are, why we do the things that we do, and I think those questions have always interested me, and so the thread for me has been people and how in whatever work that I'm doing. So when I was doing developmental psychology work and autism research, it was about understanding why people did the things that they do and then, like, helping them to achieve any goal that maybe felt a step out of reach. but is within reach. And then I think it's the same thing with entrepreneurs. We're working with people, we're learning about their hopes and dreams, and we're helping them to achieve something that's maybe like just that next step that they need
Yeah.
a bit of support to get there. So I think in the new role, like the account management role, where I'm working more with our partners like you,
Mhm.
again, same thing, like in a different realm. It's we have all these partners with these hopes and dreams for their markets, for, the organizations that you're working with, for these big impact, ideas. I mean, that you all come up with, and we're able to say, okay, what piece of that can we plug into and help you accomplish? So, yeah, it's interesting for me too to hear you say you're not an ideas person. That's usually how I define myself, and I say I love hearing other people's ideas. But I think when I talk to you about the work, I hear so many great ideas. So, just giving
Eh,
my perspective.
I think it's such an interesting thing because I look at it and I think that there's this multiple stages. So we're big fans of Patrick Lencioni and the Table Group's Six Working Geniuses,
Yeah. Mhm.
which the acronym widget is how they do it. And it's so wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. And so we walked through this a little bit with our own organization and trying to map where we were and what was going on and how do we think about making sure that we weren't living too much on one side or the other side of that spectrum. And what I realized is like I'm not the wonder guy. And so this is where it gets really interesting because I'm like I'm the invention guy. So I love ideas in the sense of where like, okay, let's take this thing that somebody has had the moment to be able to wonder, like, what could this be?
Yeah.
And then take it there and then continue to see it move. And then what I recognize is like, I clearly am not the tenacity. I'm not the person that is like, if you've got me working to get that last piece across the end line, then I'm like, yes, can I do it? Sure, I can do it.
Yeah.
Will it drive me insane? Absolutely. So, like, these are the kinds of things I think, we as we have to wrestle with. And it was interesting, Lauren, because you talked a little bit about right there that idea where how do we take that next step? So, we used to use this framework in the high ropes or experiential education environment where we talk about ELGC or experience, learn, grow, and change.
Hmm.
All right.
Okay. Okay.
And so with that, and I think the same thing begins to hold true with entrepreneurs. We would also look at this idea of these concentric circles. We'd say like, okay, it for many of us, we live in this safe zone.
Mhm.
Okay. What tends to happen is when people talk about like, oh, I'm gonna try something new, is they go out to almost like a chaos zone. So they jump from
Mhm.
safety to chaos. All
Mhm.
right. And what tends not to happen is that incremental step into growth.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
I think this is a really important part for founders. So, if you're the kind of person who loves safety and security and you try like I'm burning the boats, leaving it all behind, and I'm gonna go out and jump into this, is probably not the right first step for
It's
you.
too much right away.
Um, that's right. And so I think these are the kinds of things where the disciplines that we come from inform our work. They
Mhm.
inform how we do this. And so like I look at it like I spent, a lot of my early career in politics and people are like politics. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's big ideas. And how do we interleave those into a community that we can actually see something happen? And so, for me, like I still today I look at it as like, how do we have the will to do something big as a community? And
Mhm.
that's where that politics side comes in.
Yeah.
So we look at that and we think about how do we move these things forward. So, it's a really interesting journey. And I think that's what makes entrepreneurship so incredible is entrepreneurship is really a way of looking at the world more
Mhm.
than it is a specific discipline.
Yeah.
And so, we all bring our little flavor to the table as we do that. So, here we are. I'm down here in the South, and on the Gulf Coast, gumbo is such an important thing. And gumbo is a little of this and a little of that, and it's all getting poured in. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can have a lot of those unique flavors that can be brought together, and it can really create something advantageous that by itself you would never have. So, like that's where I love, and I think you guys express it well in the generator team as well. As I've gotten a chance to know people that are program managers and managing directors at different locations, and the
Mhm.
team. You bring something different to the table, which allows us to express and then encourage in others the ability to express things. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love the frameworks that you have for thinking through. I was not familiar with the ELGC. I was familiar with Widget, and I think all of them make me think of like, people working together. Like you're each bringing something to the table, and then you're making sure that you're at the right time. And,
Sure.
again, like a lot of the things that you said bring up other ideas for me. So thinking about, you talk about being in the South and everything that's going on there. Like, tell us a little bit about Mobile. Tell us a little bit about Innovation Portal. You took over the organization a few years ago. Like, what stage was it at then? What did you see for its future?
Yeah, I think Mobile is a very interesting story. So one, I'm from Southeast Michigan, and so I lovingly say like I have melted down the U.S. map. Okay, so for me coming in as somebody that's not a native,
Hmm.
it was interesting to be able to be in a new environment and ask a lot of questions and really learn people because I think a lot of times when if you can be perceived as an interloper, somebody that's come in from the outside, it's like if you're trying to come in and suddenly make changes,
Hmm.
that scares people a lot of times. So what we had to be able to do was to be able to like pause and ask questions and get to know the community. And what I found was I mean, it's a very beautiful community. There's a lot of really interesting things. There are things where having an outside perspective meant I had some lens to see things. So I grew up south of Detroit. I grew up in an area that was very much a heavy manufacturing environment, and I remember living through the early to mid 2000s in which that shifted. It shifted, and we saw more overseas movement and a lot of the work that was happening. And so I came to Mobile and I was like, oh, well, this is really interesting. It has a lot of that same flavor
Yeah.
because a lot of the infrastructure has been built historically around manufacturing and industry. And so learning that and seeing that, and really, I came in at, I mean, you couldn't ask for a better time, Lauren, because I moved in 2014 to Mobile. I was a trailing spouse. My wife was coming as a professor in the area, and it just so happened that the Mobile Chamber had just taken a leaders exchange trip to St. Louis, and they were studying incubation and acceleration and co-working. And I moved into town, and as I was getting ready to come to town, I did what I feel like any good millennial. I'm 45 now, so I'm one of those old millennials. Uh,
I believe
I,
that an elder millennial.
I am a cusper. I'm a bridger even. Like there's Gen X in me, it feels like at times, but I'm a elder statesman of the millennial cohort. But I was sorry, like I'm reaching out via Twitter, via social media, and I'm like, hey, where's the co-working space in town? And they're like, hey, there isn't one.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, cool. I just, we were coming from Richmond, Virginia. We had those things, and I was like really excited about what was going on. And so we don't have one, but and I love sorry, it almost sounded like I was gonna say I love a good but. Yes, I do love a good but. There we go. I love a good but, comma. And what happened there was they said, but we just came back from St. Louis and we're really interested in that. And I ended up literally my first week in Mobile, I met with the then executive director of our downtown alliance
Okay.
and a leading commercial real estate agent a broker. And they said, "Hey, we don't have one, Todd. Do you want to do one?"
Wow.
And so, I got in 2014, 2015, and I started building, the first co-working place in Mobile, and probably one of the first, to our knowledge at the time, it was the first for-profit co-working space in the state of
Wow.
Alabama. And then what was happening concurrent to that is, some people I was starting to get to know were doing the research for what became Innovation Portal. And so
Okay.
they actually were starting Innovation Portal inside my co-working space.
Okay.
And so we started collaborating. And so I was writing early curriculum for them. And I
Mhm.
was teaching entrepreneurs through the co-working space. and we were holding educational program, and so it became this, like, just perfect relationship, and so when the organization was beginning to formalize, I was asked to be on the board, and so I actually served on the board of Innovation Portal for its entire
Mm,
history until coming in as executive director at the beginning of 22. Well, in 22, we had been, about a year and a half into a new facility. So 30,000 square feet in the heart of downtown Mobile
mm,
had come online in November of 2020. A
okay.
perfect time, right, to open a workspace. So, it was tough because I think what was
Yeah.
happening is the world was wrestling with, like, the 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 situation with COVID, and, we wanna take care of each other, and so everybody's kinda still wrestling through those lockdowns, and what are the protocols, and how do we run these spaces, and here we were operating a space that was built for, like, collisions,
Yeah.
humans contacting each other. Um and we had been doing this work. I think the construction was about 2.5, 3 years long,
Mm,
and it was hard. And so, when I came in, it had been the, like, okay, how do we work to do this? And so I was blessed to be able to pick it up, and having the experience I did already with co-working and entrepreneurship, I knew the people that needed to be part of it. And so we were able to hit the ground running, and I was able to port over a lot of the educational work that I was doing. I took a 5-year stint in higher ed, in School of Business as the dean, and then vice president for academics. And so I was bringing those things in, and I brought in the people. So we went from, I'll say, 25-30% occupancy because of the situation that we were facing, and to now, we're stoked. People ask me all the time. They're like, "How's it going?" I'm like, we're totally packed up full. Right now we're sitting in an environment, we're asking questions about a next facility. We're looking at things and doing due diligence. And I think what it is it's a testament to, this is a 12-year journey that we've been on. I'm about to hit my dozen years in Mobile. I think I get a pin or something for it.
yeah. Yes.
Uh, m moved to the deep South on the Gulf Coast in a place where there's a lot of humidity, but it's beautiful. On August 1st, that was my first morning in Mobile, walked outside, and, I couldn't breathe. But I've learned to be able to endure. And I think what's happened is we've got a community where, a lot of risk aversion was there.
Mm,
It's starting to lean in a little bit more to what that looks like. And so we're seeing entrepreneurs, Lauren. I mean, this is the coolest part of it. They're building stuff that I'm like, I wouldn't have even
well,
fathomed.
I
I'll go in, like, in our first cohort of our gBETA program with Generator, we had companies that were solving for massive challenges. I mean, we've got a company, I've known the founder for now 9 years, who has an ed tech platform. She is working with founders, sorry, working with students to be able to take and help them really understand how the ACT and the SAT work in such a way that she's seen massive growth in what they're scoring on these tests because they're going through her ed tech program to be able to do this test prep. We've got a founder I actually was talking with yesterday who was up here speaking in Birmingham, and he's created this AI framework that before AI got really, I'll say, sexy as the consumer wrapper, he was using it to be able to understand anything that can go through a pipeline. All right. So he was looking at inefficiencies as it related to gas and natural gas, I think early on, and then looking at other things, and he's continued to grow. And their company, I'm like, this is incredible. And we've got a company that was in that same cohort. Now they're launching single board satellites into space. So, like,
it makes
that's a big deal. And so, that's what a 10-year arc of 2014 to 2024
yeah.
begins to look like. And so, you start taking those things into account, and we're like, there's a lot that's happening here. And so I think that's where it gets really exciting. And that's where entities like ours are really important, because we can come around people and say, like, you don't have to burn the boats to start, but you
Mhm,
do have to take these steps,
mhm,
and we're gonna help paint the picture for you because we've watched it. You're not just a one-off. there's actually some things that we can say and we can show you that help you paint that pathway.
Well, going back to the ELGC, like, you're helping
That's
them to
right.
take steps in the
That's
right
it.
order. Yeah, yeah, I love that. Well, talking about that, you're seeing this potential in the founders that you're meeting with and in the ideas that they're bringing to the table. It makes me think of, like, in psychology, this idea of people kinda rise to the expectations that we set for them. So, if
Yes.
we have really high hopes for people, they tend to rise to the occasion, and if we have really low expectations, the same can happen. Does that resonate with you? How do you
100%.
really
Yeah.
do that when you're working with founders in your community?
I think that's such an important point. I mean, it's looking at one that sense of do we have self-efficacy?
Mm,
And again, playing into the psychological perspective and what that looks like. Albert Bandura was this amazing psychologist, and he, looking at the idea, do we have the belief that we can do it? So oftentimes we have a glimmer of a belief, and we have to have people begin to affirm that and help us move into it. And I
mm,
think that's part of what we've been able to do is to be able to help affirm that and help people move. And then what happens is if we can show them this is what the standard is, and this is what excellence can look like, then all
yeah,
of a sudden it begins to transform. Because I think a lot of times we don't know. We only know what we've seen.
yeah, yeah,
And so, we talk about, and I think there's been a number of really cool books. And again, I'm a book nerd, so I often reference books.
yeah, looking at
There's do big things and
yeah,
think bigger. Were
yeah,
two books that I loved. And then another one, Erica Anderson's Be Bad First. Like, this is the idea, this is all about progress. So, like, our one of our monikers that we kind of throw around as we talk with our team is like, our opportunity is to raise the collective imagination of what's
yeah,
possible,
yeah,
right? So, if I've never done it before, I didn't know it could be done, right? But if we can begin to paint the picture and raise
right,
imagination, then what ends up happening is all of a sudden, like, sure, why not? And why not becomes the frame rather than like, "Oh,
it doesn't
should
work.
I? Why
Yeah, yeah.
could?" Yeah,
And once you show people, then the next round, you're no longer imagining, right? Now people see this
absolutely.
can happen and it can happen in Mobile. It can happen
That's right.
here. My friends and my neighbors are doing the thing. I think that is really important too, because in the beginning, you are sometimes pointing outside and saying, like, see, they did it somewhere else. And I think that's a good way to get started. And then I love how you keep it going in the community and show people, like,
Yeah.
no, 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 you can build and grow here. You don't have to go somewhere else in order to do that.
And I think that's where, and I've learned this from some of our team. They use the term now primarily in like software development and other things, building in public. I
Mm,
think that there's that like really useful framework of building in public, and it's not necessarily like I'm going to give away my secret sauce, and
right.
so I'm telling you all my secrets, but it's the idea of I think we have these untruths that often happen in entrepreneurship, and pardon, but like I like to use the frame like entrepreneurship porn. Like, yeah,
Mm.
like, it's fake. There's a lot of fake
Like
stuff
the
that's out there.
yeah,
Yeah.
like,
The
yeah,
assumption is like it's
social
yeah,
media. Yeah.
yes. I mean, how's it going? It's always up and to the right. Like the hockey stick growth is natural and it happens and it's easy. Man, this stuff it is so hard, but it's
Yeah.
worth doing. And that's the thing. So like we want to be able to say like, look, I failed as a startup founder. And being able to admit that, like,
Yeah.
here are the learnings that I have, and that scar tissue is super important because if I can help the next founder understand, like, look, y- you know, here are the things be careful about, be preparing for,
Mhm.
then it makes it a little bit easier. And it's also the idea of like, everything's not perfect. So like one of
Yeah.
our core values at the innovation portal is progress over perfection. And
Mm,
so we really lean into that idea of like, you've got to get things moving. If you're waiting to do something until you're perfect, it's never going to happen. Or if you're waiting to ship, in the software world, that was the other thing. Like you got to ship it. You got to
yeah.
ship it.
All the bugs and
Um,
everything. Yeah.
sure. So I,
Yeah.
I think I think that goes into a lot of what we're dealing with is recognizing that. And so, the other thing is I think communities from an ecosystem perspective, we have to be realistic about who we are
Mhm.
and what we are. And then we have to think about how we chart our pathway. And it was very interesting. I was sharing with somebody yesterday. I think in the early 2010s and 20 teens, what happened is a lot of communities were saying like, we want to be the next Silicon Valley,
Mhm.
or we want to be the next Boston, MIT, Cambridge kind of corridor. And they started to label themselves with those things. And the reality was, it just wasn't feasible. It
Yeah.
wasn't realistic. And so you have to be able to chart the assets in your community, and you have to think about like, what does good look like, and how do you continue to raise the opportunity and the perspective of
Yeah.
what's possible and take it incrementally. And I'll give massive credit. We went and toured the Advanced Technology Development Center, ATDC, in Atlanta,
Mhm.
Georgia, really about 11 years ago. And their executive director at the time, Jen Benet, who is like just a goat in the world of ecosystem work. Jen looked at myself and then our founding executive director, and she said, "Look, you're going to want what we have in 2 years, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You've got to think about this as a 20-year arc. And so look at where your entrepreneurs for 20 years from now are, and start investing in them right now. Because
Mhm.
if you're going to build that, it's a long tail journey, and you've got to be able to do that." And so that's where I think it's really interesting, because I walk through this journey of like, I have to have patience,
Yeah.
but I also have to have this absolute, unwillingness to settle.
Right, it's like
And
the
and
drive.
so you're wrestling with
Yeah,
this tension.
yeah, exactly.
A and I think that that same thing bears true, for founders as well, as, like, there has to be some level of patience, but at the same time, you cannot accept status quo and staying.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, I mean, going back to your background reminds me of your dissertation in organizational humility. Like that sounds like a thread there where as an organization, you have to have a sense of like putting others first and really
Yeah.
seeing what the vision is and how you're going to drive towards that. I'm curious. I know, for me, like I could go buy my dissertation once in a while, but is
Yep.
that something that you still see as a part of your work, that organizational humility piece?
So it's an interesting thing, because I'll say it went from, thinking higher ed and living in that, and thinking of research and living in that. And I'll say, like, I was never the researcher that my wife was and that
Mm,
her research team was, but I was deeply fascinated by this. So I
yeah.
I I have fallen in love with the idea that, you know, uh, leadership is not a it is not a person. It is a system and a process. And so when I started looking at humility, I became very fascinated. So around this time, there were a lot of like ideas like uh, resilience.
Mhm.
Resilience was being talked about. Like, well, could groups become resilient, and could
Mm,
organizations become resilient? We thought about it as like an individual thing. And so I started looking at humility, and I was blessed to have a dissertation advisor who had done work around it. And I was like, this is really interesting, because humility, I think a lot of times it gets a really bad rap, in the sense of people are like, oh, that's just a humble person, in the sense of like, you're the kind of person that gets walked all over.
right.
And what I found when I dug into the research, and I mean, like, going back into Hebrew and Christian scripture, and looking at Greek philosophy, and looking at it across, really now a couple thousand years, I found that when you look at the core of humility, it was really an understanding like, I am not the end all be all. I
Mhm.
have a willingness to learn. I recognize the true value of other people. So, like, I have an accurate portrayal of self, and
Yeah.
I have an accurate understanding of yourself. So, like, when I look at other people, and I think about this in the sense of how startups work and how organizations work, like, if I have hubris, or I have this unrealistic perspective of myself, I'm gonna go out and try and build something I
Yeah.
have no preparation for. So,
Yeah.
like, a buddy of mine uses it, and he's like, "There's whisper ideas, and
Mm.
there are mountaintop ideas." All right. So
Mm.
Brian Scordato, thank you out there. He said, you know, the person that's not really prepared and doesn't really have the expertise oftentimes is gonna have the whisper ideas because it's like,
Mm,
if I tell it too loud, somebody's gonna steal it, and I'm
that
not uniquely equipped for it. But if I'm
interesting.
uniquely equipped for it, then he's like, "Why am I not screaming it from the mountaintop? This is what I'm doing." And
Yeah.
I think that goes back into the sense of humility. So it's the
Mm,
idea of like, when we know what we are, when we know what we're positioned for, when we have a willingness to learn,
mm,
what it does is it keeps us in this forward leaning environment where there's constantly a growth mindset that can take
mm,
place, and it can help us push forward. And so it's also the understanding, like, you know, I think a lot of in the growth of my education and other places, that time we talked a lot about like a well-rounded person.
mhm,
And you know, we talk about fixing your negatives, and we talk about like, all right, you need to skill up on these things. Well, what became very interesting as I was looking at humility even more, and now this goes into the founders as well. It's like, I don't need you to be all things.
yeah.
In fact, I see the single greatest choke point that most founders have is they don't know how to let go of something
They're trying to
because
do
they suck at it. Yeah, they suck at it. I mean, like, I was talking with one of our founders the other day, and I was like, "You are incredible at this. This is the time suck. Like, when you are trying to do that part, it's taking your time, it's taking your joy, it's taking your ability to execute on what brings the most value." And I think that's true. So, like, part of what it is calling a spade and
Mm,
saying, like, I might be able to do something if I'm, like, working my darndest at it, and I'm trying everything that I can to do that, but is that the right move to make? And
yeah.
so in this literature around humility, a lot of it was like, no, I understand myself enough to say, like, no, that's I need to find a not me to be able to work alongside.
It's not my working genius, so,
That's it.
yeah.
That's it.
Okay, well, speaking of finding the perfect match, I wanna
Yeah.
talk about our partnership. So,
Yeah.
you mentioned a few minutes ago, the gBETA program that founders are working through. So I definitely wanna talk about gBETA, but kinda origin story, how did the partnership between Innovation Portal and Generator come about? Like, what were you trying to accomplish at
Yeah.
that
I I've actually shared this story quite a bit, as I've talked to other people who are, you know, they're thinking about what's the right thing in their community. And I think this is really interesting. So again, we talk about like, do you understand yourself? So
moment?
I knew that Mobile is, it's a great community, but it's not what we would think of as like the first tier city. It's not, you know, it's not your New Yorks and Bostons and Chicago's. It's not your Atlanta and LA and San Fran and Seattle. And I knew that I had to be very strategic. So
Mhm,
this was something different. How do we bring in somebody that can be a trusted partner that we can work alongside? So I knew on kind of my list, I needed to have people who I could see has done the kind of work that I thought we needed to do in a
mhm,
community that has some overlap to us. Okay. So
mhm,
like that's on my list. I
mhm,
wanted to be able to look at and see how do I help point our community, because as I said, when I think about Mobile, Mobile's backdrop, I mean, we have some amazing companies. You look at Airbus has turned Mobile into the fourth largest aviation cluster in the world. It's Toulouse, Hamburg, Seattle, Mobile, Alabama. Like
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, that's incredible. We have
yeah,
an incredible shipbuilder with the Navy who's been producing originally combat ships and now submarines. We have some amazing, incredible, large multinational steel manufacturers. We've got chemical manufacturers. We have incredible engineering companies. So we have this very um, interesting blue collar identity. And it was like, I need to find somebody who can help us shape our startup community to come alongside that.
mhm,
And so I started asking questions, and I will tell you the greatest thing that I have found is go out and see it. And so it was now, I think, about 3.5 years ago. I took a trip with a group from the state to Milwaukee. And in Milwaukee, we were able to see Generator live and in real color.
Mhm.
We were able to see from the program partners and hear their stories. We were able to see and understand for the people that they keep network with, the assets and the resources. Um, and that was incredibly telling. It was the first time I think we met, Lauren. Uh, it was great to be able to see, and I think that's one of the things that over the course of time has been proven out over and over again is to be able to watch and learn. And I will tell you, like the work y'all have done in Wisconsin was very interesting to me because again, I know Wisconsin as a
Mhm.
Midwesterner. To see the work in Indiana was very attractive. Again, my wife's family's, from in and around the Indianapolis area. To see that work in the collaboration with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation
Mhm.
and different communities in Indiana, I was like, "Okay, these are great indicators to us that we have an opportunity." And then, even in my own state, we weren't the first in the state of Alabama to come on board with generators, so we started watching and asking questions of our friends in Birmingham with Prosper and Bronze Valley, and we were listening to what was happening in Huntsville,
Mhm.
and so it became one of those things like, I'm again, ministry was a background, so I like to play into the idea passage in scripture, taste and see the Lord is good. Like
Mhm.
I believe in get those samples and
Yep.
the easiest way to know something is what you think it is to see how it's actually being acted out,
Mhm.
Don't tell me what you could do.
Right.
I wanna see what you're doing right now.
Actually doing, yeah, and talking to the people who are on the receiving end, yeah, because
That's it.
it's hearing it's those true testimonials, right? So,
Makes
yeah.
all the difference. Yep.
And yeah, so we've been working together all of these years. Just to give people a sense, the gBETA program, it's free for participants. And I think that's a key factor because as you're talking about the folks who are really early in the development of an idea, of a business, of a livelihood, taking away some of those barriers can be really helpful so that they can take that next step, take the jump into entrepreneurship. So how
Yeah.
do you feel that having gBETA as a free part-time program influences who comes through the doors there?
Yeah, I think it matters so much. We think very significantly about how do we reduce the barrier to entry.
Mm.
That's a big deal in our community because Mobile is a very interesting and rich, socioeconomically diverse,
Mhm.
unique cultural community. And so it became really important for us that there are a lot of barriers. There's a lot of barriers in society, and even people that have, they have means that they come from.
Mhm.
It's not always easy to jump directly into, and I highly encourage people. Like I usually talk like if you're a billionaire, you can do whatever you want. If you're not, you need to listen
Yeah, so
because we're going to
yeah,
help you make sure that's
yeah.
right. So when we look at this, we think about like this is it's a funnel, and I want to be able to look at how do I help people continue to progress in the funnel, and to be able to say, look, I've got a program that I can bring you into that's part of our ecosystem, because I think that's a really important play. It's like this is not
Mhm.
just some random thing that's devoid from the character and culture of what else is going on around you, but they're trusted partners and we work closely together. And when you're done with this, you haven't like graduated and left. You're still in the ecosystem.
Mhm.
And we're able to watch them. And so, what happens a lot of times as I work with these founders is we see it and their eyes become quite open. They become
Mm.
quite open in the journey because it's, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so being able to have that proximity to subject matter experts in like, well, what does startup finance look like? And how do I think about go-to-market strategies? And where do I need to be thinking about in regard to building my team? And these other things that I think sometimes that might be taken for granted if
Yeah.
it's your third or fourth startup or you're in a place where there's just high density. And so it's been really exciting to watch those founders go through it, and they come out and there's not like, I mean, here we are, we've got PhDs after our name. So you think about the amount of educational debt that we probably brought together between the two of us, right? there's not a debt that they're facing on that.
Mm.
But, I've heard some founders say it's like, "This is like an MBA over the course of my 7, 8 weeks,
Yeah, yeah,
and I built a killer network out of it as well."
yeah,
So I've been infused with, all of these mentors who really want to help. They really wanna help, and they're pouring in, and they're doing things that are introducing me to new people, or they're pointing out things that maybe I didn't have perspective to be able to see myself. They're
mhm,
introducing me to, those people that could be investors, and at the
mhm,
very least, those people who are gonna help me understand who's not my investor, right?
right,
So all of these intangibles are happening, and then you start looking at it, and it's funny because, I know, our founding executive director was at our last gBETA, showcase, and when, JD, who's our program manager, program director in Mobile, he was talking about some of the data,
mm,
about what's happened in Mobile over the last. I mean, we've really only been running this for 2 years. We've been working with you guys leading up to it, but really only 2 years, and the amount of money raised, and the revenue, and the jobs created, and she looked at me and she was like, "Whoa, like, this is incredible. This is what the vision was about. Like,
yeah,
if we partner, these are the kinds of things that can happen." And I think, you have to look at it as an investment. You have to look at it as an investment
mm,
in the future of your community, and it's very interesting. I was talking with one of our team members this morning about economic development, and this is a form of economic development,
yeah,
but it's an investment into the people of your community,
mhm,
and looking at it in the sense of, we believe that there is something that can happen
mhm,
when somebody has this new lens or new frame of reference that can allow us to propel forward
yeah.
and give belief in ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of, again, like just connecting all so many things that you've touched on. Like you're creating the conditions for somebody to see the possibilities. You're showing them examples of other people in their community who have already done it and connecting them with those people so that they can talk. And the
Absolutely.
more experienced entrepreneurs can say, here's some mistakes to avoid or things to look out for or people that you should connect with. Let me introduce you. And then even connecting them to the broader generator network, like you said, after the program, it's not
Yeah.
over. So helping them to then see the bigger picture, like now you're really locally, deeply connected and embedded. And then you also expand across, I think it's really, yeah, it's a helpful lens to give new entrepreneurs because, like you said, they just don't know. And then once you're in that world, then it just kind of like continue, all the connections continue from there. It's
Absolutely.
just like opening the door for them to come in. I think it's such an exciting stage,
It
right? Because it's like
it is.
mentor swarm that they go to. They're like, "Oh, I learned so many things. Like my mind is so full of advice," and it's exciting.
Well, and it's interesting because I look at this as like, it's a transformational journey and not a transactional process.
Mhm.
And then I
Mhm.
also look at it in the sense of, in the work that I do and some of our team members, like, one, I sit on the gBETA National Advisory Board. So I'm able to talk to
Yeah.
colleagues across the country who are doing this and think about how we continue to grow this, because I think you guys are smart in the sense of like, you haven't reached this place and just stopped. It's the continued growth of like, how do
Mhm.
we learn and ask these things? How do we try new things that we think can help bring more value into communities? And in the same way, like, I participate in mentor swarms and other markets. So, like, I was up at Michigan Tech Week in Detroit from Michigan, so I love being able to pour
Mhm.
back into my Michiganders.
Right, right.
But I'm watching the babies that I mentored 2 years ago up on stages and having these conversations. I'm like, "Yeah, I see that." I mentor with our folks in Birmingham and in Huntsville, mentor with our folks in Indianapolis, and it's to me, this is the part where I think entrepreneurship is such a unique environment, and it's a great network. So it's that constant sense of, how do we take the things that we're learning here and share them open-handedly? So that's one of the things
Yeah.
I tell people all the time. Like, this is about
Mhm.
open-handedness.
Mhm.
I cannot hold it close to the chest, because in ecosystem work, we have to be very much about sharing and engaging, and we do it with a matter of respect and honor of each other. So we look at that and I'm like, I'm learning all the time. And it also, when you're talking about like setting the bar,
Mhm.
when I talk to founders in other markets and I see sometimes the things that they're doing, I'm like, all right, y'all, we got to ratchet it back up because
Yeah.
we're not competing in just a tiny little market. We're competing in a global
Right.
marketplace. And I think that's where it gets really interesting, Lauren. And that's where I think, it's been really valuable for us as an organization to partner with y'all. I think it's been great for our founders to be able to do that because it helps them navigate in a place that maybe they didn't have the network and they had uncertainty and they didn't know what they didn't know. Somebody that's able to be a wayfinder in the journey.
Mhm. I love that. And kind of helping with that wayfinding, you know, there's different ideas about creating community in markets. There's like the idea of if you build it, they will come, there's this idea of like manufactured community. How do you think about community in Mobile and, at Innovation Portal, and how do you intentionally build that?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that you have to do is you have to be able to create an environment first and build trust slowly. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of times there are people who blaze in and they try to do something, and the concern is, can I trust them? Will it have longevity?
Mm,
And so what we did is we really said, like, we want to open the doors. We want to keep a low barrier to entry. We want to help people. We want to love on the founders in the community. We want to help we have nonprofits that are part of our community because we believe that they're attacking and approaching really important issues, and we
yeah.
want to help them on that journey. So I think it took that, but then I also think in much the same way that you think like a two-sided marketplace, then we had to look at like, okay, as we're building this local trust and we're doing this, we had to begin to say, okay, but here are pictures over here of what we can do that will continue to grow it. So we couldn't just do the old, field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. We had to show proof, but as we built proof, then it gave us more license to do a little bit more vision casting and big picture. Like, we're going to go after this. And I think, here we are. We're now an organization that's this year, later on this year, we'll celebrate our 10th anniversary. Like, that now gives us credibility that when I share some of my crazy ideas about what I believe is just around the corner for us, um, it's not met with, "Oh, sure," the eye roll. It's not met with the as much skepticism, and certainly I don't mind skepticism in it, but it allows us to be able to look at it and say, like, we're on that pathway. And so I think it's, my encouragement to people is like, start where you are,
Mhm.
build with the people that you have, but then as you continue to get momentum, stretch where you can go.
Yeah. Mhm.
You have to have that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, congrats on the upcoming 10-year and your 12 years in the area. Um, you kind of you just kind of addressed founders who might be listening. I know there's probably a lot of people still in Mobile who maybe are interested in connecting or going through a gBETA program or coming into Innovation Portal. If you're able to leave them with one or two takeaways, what would those be?
Yeah, I think some of the most important things that we can tell people is solving big problems is tough,
Mhm.
but it's worth it.
Yeah.
And when you come with some level of expertise, oftentimes what you don't know is you don't know the mechanism of building a startup. And so let us work with you. Let
Mhm.
us work with you to take the understanding that you have in the hypotheses that you come with, and let us shape that into what can be a beautiful startup. So I always tell people at the beginning, your baby is ugly. You just have to come to grips with the fact that it's an idea,
Yeah.
and ideas by their very nature aren't fully formed and they don't have all the structure. But when you come into a program like gBETA, when you partner with an organization like Innovation Portal, what you begin to see is you begin to see that opportunity to build the right structure and strategy that help you reach maturity with that idea. So the idea becomes a real thing, and that thing can really take off. And I think that's a big deal. I also think, in the same way, you've got to take these things as experiments. So if your first step is trying to launch this massive company, you're probably taking the wrong first step. We want to take those steps in such a way that we can make sense. So we were talking early on, I don't want to go from a safe zone to chaos
Yeah.
because then I'm just taking on too many variables that I'm trying to consistently control for. And when we do that, what we recognize is I oftentimes am going to crush a good thing before it gets a chance to start
Mhm.
because I'm trying to introduce too many points of failure. So
Yeah.
we want to be able to look at that. And that's why we talking about, minimum viable
Mhm.
products. We talk about having those early stage theses or the idea of like, I believe this because this.
Yeah.
So we want to help you take that pathway and then really chart that journey that makes sense for you and know that it can be done in your community and we can show you the proof of those people around you.
I love that. And I think, part of why I've enjoyed this conversation, our partnership, and the work together is the just kind of that sense of trust that you build. Like I could definitely see you doing that with founders and making it a comfortable space to be vulnerable and to share an idea that isn't fully formed and to get that feedback. So I appreciate the intentionality that you bring to the work and love seeing the passion that comes out when we talk about it.
Yeah.
Uh, Last question, leave us with a
Yeah.
couple more books that we should check out
Oh,
because I know you're always
wow.
blasting through your library.
Yeah, gosh. Okay, so I look at this because I think every person in the entrepreneurship space should be thinking about money. One, I didn't come from a background in which I studied or understood a lot of money. I knew how money left my pocket, and that's about it.
Mhm.
So what I have been really enjoying is there's three books. Morgan Housel is the author. The Psychology of Money, The Art of Spending Money, and
Oh, yes.
Same as Ever. Oh, they are absolutely worth your time. Incredible, brilliant, lovely. I am currently reading right now Arthur Brooks' book on finding meaning.
Oh,
And I think meaning is such an important part of the entrepreneurial journey because he talks about like, you want to have that sense of purpose and you want to have coherence in what you're doing and you want to think about what's there and how do we wrestle with it. And so I'm really, really enjoying that one. And then I'll give a big shout out, Eric Reese, who influenced so many of us in the startup world. Eric's new book, Incorruptible, is just incredible. And it's incredible because it's one of those like canary in the coal mine kind of books where you have to stop and ask the question of like, how do we make sure that we build sustainable companies that really keep the mission?
yeah.
And so I've just thoroughly enjoyed that one. So those are just a couple right now that I've either just read or in the process of reading, and I love. But yeah, I could I said they're like my babies. I love them all. I can tell you, depending on the time and the moment, what to read and why to read it. So yeah. Well, what are you reading, Lauren? Let me talk. I'm gonna flip it the
Yeah,
other way. I want to add
yeah.
my list.
I'm
Yeah.
still reading Incorruptible, so I haven't finished that one yet, and
Yep.
then
Yep.
I'm a fiction person, so yeah,
No issue there.
yeah.
Yep.
So I'm reading, I'm gonna blank on the name right now, but I'm reading a novel about, immigrants from Cameroon who come to the
Okay.
US, like, right around the 2008 financial crisis, so it's, like, just before.
Oh,
So you can
wow.
know that that's looming. They're really excited to be getting, set in the US, like this lifelong dream, and then this is gonna come. And, my parents are immigrants, so like reading books like that kind of gives me a little picture into what the experience was like and some of those sacrifices were like, but it's really good.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I'm reading another one, but I'm like, I'm like imagining where they are in my house.
I
Like
totally understand that. Yep.
someone
Yep.
is lost somewhere. So the
Yeah.
novel has been the first one that I'm reading, and then I can't read Incorruptible before bed because it's a
A
little intense.
and I
So
think that's an important thing, and I've got a good friend, she has a whole podcast, on books, and so I've been a guest there, and I'm like,
cool.
I love the idea of books as tools, okay? So, like, I every night when I go to bed, I'm listening to an audiobook.
Okay.
It helps put me to sleep, and I put my, 15-minute timer on, and I'm good, and so I love a fiction book because it helps me suspend reality, it helps me use my imagination, it helps me work into those things. I love historical fiction. I love history.
Mhm.
I love psychology. I love communication, leadership, startups. And so what I think, one of the things that I heard from people is like, not everybody has a chance to be directly working with a mentor
Mm.
who, really pulls them forward, but we all have the opportunity to have these people as mentors simply by picking up a book.
Yeah.
And I was
Right.
like, "Oh, that's brilliant." And so, I've got bookshelves and bookshelves and bookshelves, and then my audio bookshelves and my digital, Kindle bookshelves. And so, like, I think that's one of the things where, like, I have learned so much, with curiosity as probably the most important framework.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I definitely know who to come to for book recommendations.
Hey,
Thanks, Todd. It's been so fun
absolutely.
talking to you today. I appreciate you spending the
Likewise.
time.
My pleasure.